Hello, everyone. So, by all means, come up and join the stage. So, analytics and measurement is what I like to call a nonstop thrill ride. Everyone gets really excited. It's the sexiest thing that anyone's going to discuss. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to actually talk through about the importance of measuring the creator economy and how brands and creators can make sure you're optimizing to be as successful as possible. And so before we begin, we'll go down the panel and do some introductions.
Yeah, my name is Chris Peterson. I'm the CEO and founder of Download Media, also a senior advisor to Podspace. Download Media is essentially a fund where we are acquiring majority stakes in podcast companies to roll them up to create a more profitable entity. Podspace is an ad tech company focused on audio out of Europe, which is expanding globally, and I help them on that and all things audio.
Hi everyone, I'm Amane Atai. I am GM of Audience Measurement at Nielsen. Some of you may know Nielsen as the ratings company, but we do a lot more. We try to measure audiences everywhere.
Hi everybody, my name is George Ruiz, and I'm the Global Head of Marketing Science at TikTok. And so what I do with the team over the last 5 years is really help to answer two very basic but fundamental advertising questions for clients. Do the ads work, and how and why do they work? And so this is something when it comes to measurement and research, my team is very passionate to work with this esteemed group here.
See, I told you, nonstop thrill ride. So to give a bit of preface, first of all, with respect to my voice, after this, I'm competing in a Kathleen Turner sound-alike contest. So please forgive me for the raspiness of my voice. But to kick off, one of the things that we want to ground ourselves in is there's been a lot of momentum with actually measuring the effectiveness of the creator economy in the past year or two. And everyone's focusing on the lower funnel. Whaler did research with Nielsen where we actually showed creators drive a 2.4x ROI compared to the entire media mix. And those are really great results. But we also know that it's not a simple partner with the creator and generate ROI. So we'd love to do a bit of a deep dive to understand what does effectiveness look like and how are we actually evaluating it. And so to begin, and this is going to be a question for everyone, Nielsen's 2024 marketing report showed that 63% of media investment is going to be digital. That is 2/3 of the budgets. How are we actually determining measuring effectiveness and measuring effectiveness consistently? We'll start with George at the end.
Well, this is the $1 million question. And I think what happens is you have to go through a measurement journey with each client at a time. First, you have to provide the right measurement solutions and the right frameworks, but you have to go on this journey to understand fundamentally what is a business outcome that clients are trying to achieve. Sometimes it could be brand outcomes, it can be reach outcomes, sometimes it could be offline sales outcomes, other times they can be customized events. But what happens is you have to work with what is the client looking to achieve for their business growth, and then back into having a really solid process and solutions that you can drive accountable progress throughout. And then as you accomplish those goals, you try to understand what are the things that are driving those results, and how do I get the right teams to be held accountable. So I know we'll talk a little bit later about some of the tools and mechanics and systems, but it is something to where with what we've done with our teams at TikTok is build the right solutions to meet marketers where they are, ensure that you're delivering reproducible results to show effectiveness across multiple solutions, and also provide really strong thought leadership and compelling research to provide guidance and best practices on how to continue to prove and improve.
Well, I'll flip it because I think George covered a lot of great points. If we put brand at the center, how brands grow is inherently connected to their ability to be able to keep, grow customers. And at the core of that is essentially their ability to be able to reach and capture new audiences. They can, once they capture those audiences, they can hit them up with a very memorable message that will help with their brand equity and awareness, or it could be some convincing message for them to take an action. And so when we think about that reaching incremental audiences, the question is very simple that the brands want to ask is that within my media mix, which now includes a lot of different platforms and channels, what is the unique and incremental value of each element of that campaign? Super simple question. The answer, unfortunately, is a challenging and an unsexy mechanical one, that's just very hard to do. You guys know in the world that we are, which is fraught with privacy concerns and regulations, the datas are all siloed. It's resulting in a very siloed and walled off ecosystem, which makes it very hard to measure that. But at the core of that, just to get back to Gaz's question, is that brands want to know what's the unique and incremental value of every element of my campaign for different KPIs within their funnel.
Perfect setup, because if I'm going to talk about podcast specific, the way podcasts are distributed usually is via RSS feed, which is very archaic. It's really hard. It's a black box to figure out, like, you know, point A to point B, what happened from an audience movement or brand, you know, success. Obviously, I'm looking at podcasts from an audio, but also video, and you're including multiple platforms in that. But what I would say is it's cultural influence, right? And especially in the last, you know, quarter or two, I think from podcasts specifically, we've seen the cultural influence that they've had on a pretty large scale. And so if we're looking at that, if I'm a brand, I want to be where the influence is happening, and podcasts are definitely having a moment right now with that. And the reason isn't it's not just a flash in the pan. It's because a podcast, you're choosing to listen to it. They're leaning into that program. They're putting an earbud typically in their ears, and it's very intimate, and you're one-on-one with that conversation versus any other medium, which is a lot of times lean back, whatever's on, I'm going to let the algorithm throw it to me, which is great. And that benefits podcasting. It benefits all mediums. But to me, it's just what's going to influence? How can my brand be a part of that? And right now, I just don't think there's anything better than podcasting, but very biased in that opinion.
I mean, that was a very neutral POV. Thank you for that. No, I think it's important because, I mean, 63% of media spend being digital. Obviously, it's being spread across multiple digital touch points. And it is funny to think like that one bucket has so many different avenues along it. But before we get there, George, you said something interesting where it's a partnering with brands and building learning agendas. There is no way you don't have brands coming to you and saying, well, how do I get there? How do I actually get to ROI? How do you, from an analytics space, guide them to driving ROI?
I think there's two components. Most brands that we work with, they already have, they've already gone through some parts of their journey to understanding on what effectiveness means to them. So we have to meet them where they are. But what's often been one of the case, even since the very beginning, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, when back in the day we were saying don't make ads, make TikToks, that was because a lot of brands had a lot of challenges understanding the right creative quality or the creative components. So as you saw, a lot of the things that we've been publishing, they've been helping to give brands the opportunity on how do you jump in, how do you actually participate in the community, how do you drive the right tone, the right authenticity. But it's been about this creative best practices to have the opportunity to be seen. And the reason why, and also being seen and also being able to resonate. Once you're able to uncover that kind of creative quality and creative receptivity, those are the precursors that can help you to drive creative effectiveness. Once you do that, then you have the right measurement solutions in the back end to understand your media weight, your media frequency, and those are the things that you kind of layer on together. But what I've seen more and more and time again, and this is beyond just TikTok, one of the most important predictors of effectiveness is creative quality. And those are the areas to where it will be different platform by platform. So a TV ad is good for TV, a podcast structure is good for podcast, TikTok style is great for TikTok. But brands I've seen are able to kind of evolve to where they know how to master for platforms today. But how do you actually like take their core assets that are able to speak for their brand and really customizing for their different touch points? So in many ways, that's where we are today. But it is unique one client at a time because each client will be at different stages of that journey. It's about providing the tools, the flexibility, and the framework, but still the guidance throughout the way.
And so I think from there, it would be important, like we're talking about TikTok as a platform. How do you then focus it onto the broader digital ecosystem?
Yeah, actually, I will definitely touch on that, but just to build on what George said, if you don't mind, to me, it's also around getting ROI is about getting human connection right, and that expands beyond content into creative. So the report that you mentioned, Gaz, earlier on the same kind of research, we found out that a lot of consumers are finding that the ads are not relevant to them. They don't include their identity group. For example, for Black audiences, they had mentioned that 59% of them are more likely to buy from a creative or a brand that features their identity group. And if they don't, they're willing to look elsewhere. So when we think about content, having representation and including different groups is a little bit easier. But when you think of creative, that if you want to have every group represented in your creative, that's a ton of permutations of creatives, which will break any brand's budget. So coming back to what you both said, what we're seeing at Nielsen is within platforms such as TikTok or podcasting, where's this inherent setup that you have influencers or creators that the consumers are following them for a reason. They relate to them. So that creates such an opportunity for brands to include their ads in a way that's authentic, that is like that goes with the content, and they don't need to create all these versions of the creative as long as they're following the strengths of those platforms. And that's where we see a lot of the ROI come into play.
I mean, it's trust, right? Like when you're following a creator, doesn't matter the medium, you inherently are trusting them for entertainment or their advice, whatever it is. And so if that creator is recommending something and is conscious of the trust that they have with their audience, it's going to be successful, right? And so, you know, from my side, I go with brands, and, you know, previously I was at iHeartMedia and we worked with, you know, brands that they wanted a specific, this is the talking point, we're not going to deviate. And I could tell you it wasn't going to work on day one. You've got to let the creator, we worked with Will Ferrell on the Anchorman podcast. You've got to trust that Will Ferrell is going to sell your brand better than you can because he knows his audience, right? And so I think that it doesn't matter if it's a Will Ferrell or someone that maybe none of us would know on TikTok, but has millions of followers because they're connecting with a super specific audience. Brands need to trust that, and that's the opportunity in the creator space that I think is often overlooked or not realized, is that you can tap into an audience that you just can't do by buying ads on like NBC today.
Well, I mean, that's actually a perfect segue to, we're seeing in the data at Whaler that brands that do it alone don't do as well as brands that partner with creators, right? Creators provide those additional touch points, and they provide the higher fidelity and creativity and those higher signals. So a question for the panel, and we'll start with you, Chris. How does a brand pick the right creator, and how does a creator pick the right brand?
I don't know. I mean, that's the tough thing, right? And I think you should actually maybe answer that question, because for me, it's, you know, I work primarily with the creator, the host. And so my viewpoint is always like, what are you using in your daily life? What are the things that you actually like? What are you excited about? And then I would go to the sales team and say, here's the things you need to hit. The sales team doesn't often like that necessarily, or, you know, like take an order for what you should go sell. But that's where I would start. And if you have someone that already has that platform, has a base of, you know, influence, you can go there. If you're starting from scratch, totally different scenario potentially, because you don't have that leverage. But like that's where I started. What are the natural organic things that make all of the sense in the world that you should be promoting, and then connect the brand to that? From the brand perspective, I think you're looking at people, and it's easier than ever because of all of the avenues to find, you know, content creators of like, okay, here's someone that, you know, is really into sports. I'm trying to sell athletic goods, whatever. Let me go find these people that seem to have an engaged audience. But it's not simple.
Yeah, I mean, I would take that and like bring it over to Amina, where it's interesting because fundamentally what you're saying is find incremental audiences to your brand, people you're not already speaking to. So what would be the signals that a brand should actually look for to say, like, this is the right creator with the right community that we should talk to? Is it simply coming down to the size of the community, or is it about how they're engaging?
I think there's a lot of elements, and there's definitely some art to it. I won't take that away from brands and the creators, but there's also a lot of data that could be layered on that one. You can right now there's just so much data and analytics out there. You can understand the composition of your audiences from age and gender, but all these other elements around their affinity to different brands, their what they watch, what they buy, all of that. So you have that, and as a brand, you also know who are you going after. So putting all of that together, it is possible to have the insights that you want to see. Okay, I am going to go after these influencers or creators not only because they have wide reach, but this is the attributes that they have that can help my brand. And then it's important to, again, and now this is my unbiased opinion, but I think it is very important to then couple that with some rigorous research study or measurement to make sure that, okay, I did this and it worked. How do I improve upon that? And that's where you need to know the incrementality of each element of your campaign to be able to do that effectively.
Well, funny thing, we have been publishing some pretty interesting things lately. We have a recent What's Next report that has a lot of the trends and the insights that can help to unpack that. But I do think that when it comes to creators, the recipe in some ways it's you gotta have authenticity, you gotta have relevance, and you gotta have enough creative variety. Some things that we've seen lately is that creators do resonate, and creators are more effective when you're looking at when you try to understand what are the drivers that's working. But then it gets more subtle, such as creators that are advertising within the vertical of your product and recommending your product and also using your product. They tend to be more effective. If you say as a creative best practice, do you want to show your product? That's a pretty straightforward best practice. But having creators that are also in the same vertical and that are also endemic, like if you are advertising a technology product, do you have a creator that's speaking about that regularly and are using that product to give that recommendation? Those are recipes that you can kind of, they're not necessarily rocket science, but they're precursors for how do you actually build authenticity leading to relevance. And then based on how you want to communicate your product and your unique proposition, that's where you gotta have the creative variety, and then that leads into ultimately, then you get into the media components and the media drivers of how do you get effectiveness. But it is so important to get that planning perspective of the creative right, because you get that right, then the media and then the effectiveness work comes in.
Well, so you mentioned authenticity, which is obviously something that's really important for the creator economy and partnering with brands. But there's another A word, which is attention. And attention is something that keeps coming to the forefront. And I'm not sure if everyone's heard about the Netflix 50% rule, where for those of you who are not aware, when they're identifying programs to put into production, they do an assessment to see if somebody would pay attention to 50% of what's happening on screen, because they know people are going to be on their phones, on their laptops, doing other things. So does it pass the 50% rule? Given creators have these captivated audiences, how do you guys think about assessing the impact of attention when it comes to creators? And I'm going to be interested because, Chris, you already called out that podcasts are a very leaned in audience. So how does that translate into effectiveness when you look at a podcast?
I mean, it's very tough because everyone's fighting for attention, and if you don't realize that, while someone's listening to your podcast or scrolling TikTok, that they're also doing something else, right? And so from a creator perspective, I think, if we're looking at like a chat-based show, which is a lot of the podcasts, that's the most famous type, like from a Joe Rogan down, versus like a scripted, I think it's a very different conversation, right? When you're looking at that 50% rule, because for scripted and anecdotally for me, like I can't catch up to something when it's audio only. I need to be very locked into that. And so I use that in my own bias when I'm thinking about projects or helping a creator. For a chat show, I feel that's very much just like, on the news, someone's going to be scrolling Twitter, X, whatever, things are happening. But it's, again, like that's one of those tough things. And, the beauty of podcasting is that most of the time the barrier to entry is very low. TikTok mostly is the same, I guess, compared to a Netflix series where you're paying millions of dollars just for, even one episode. So you don't have to necessarily consider that so much, especially like an interview-based show. It turn on the mics, the cameras, and you can go and see if it works or not.
When I think of the whole 50% rule, I don't love that for us as humans. Someone who loves like storytelling.
fair.
Yeah, that's pretty sad. But if that's the world we live in, I mean, attention, for those of you who are not deep versed into, the measurement world, attention metrics exist there, and there are ways to capture that. But also what we find is that because there's challenges in understanding, okay, what is the fragmentation of attention? How do we attribute that? When you run attribution studies or mixed studies, essentially how you are as a brand able to capture the attention during the time that you have the attention essentially shows up in your results on ROI results. So when we think at Nielsen of the different ways to capture attention, there are some metrics that are valuable, and I'm not, I do think they serve a purpose. But also when you run any sort of ROI study, they should, if they're rigorous methodology included, they should be able to capture the pickup of your ability to have that attention.
Yeah, I think funny thing about attention is that it's not a new topic in advertising effectiveness. We've called it many different things, but it's been around for 30 plus years. I think what's different is that the ability for technological innovation and advancements into having a more comprehensive measurement stack has allowed us to actually uncover and build these learning agendas more. I think there's a couple of things. One is, to advertisers, the ultimate metric is going to be about business outcomes. You have to find first order priority of having rigorous measurement to build towards that. And as you back into it, you're going to find ways to understand diagnostics for improvement. And so in the last couple of years, as we've done a lot of research with a team on understanding what are the drivers of attention, it still comes down to things like creative quality or authenticity or receptivity. But the one thing I find particularly interesting is that when I get questions on things like attention, I often have to remind attention is earned. It's not controlled. So you can build, so as a lagging indicator in your measurement, you can kind of understand different components of attention, but you have to then go to the next level and says, what can I do to make a change? It goes back to, what are you doing in your media mix? What are you doing in your creative plan? In TikTok, we know that creators are really great with the resonate, with the right creators and the right vertical and the right mix. You have a better chance of getting attention. Now, there's no magic formula, but I think the planning and the construct of how you guide as to what you want to do once you understand what attention looks like, that to me separates those who have more superior campaigns that are more effective versus just regular campaigns that are just okay as effective.
No, I love that attention is earned, right? You can't force attention, and I think we see the data in forced view isn't necessarily the best thing that you always see. One question that I have, and I am cognizant of time, so this might be the last question, and I'm gonna direct it to Amine, but I want to hear from everyone. How have conversations with brands evolved over the past few years on measuring effectiveness? I'm thinking about this from the lens of the creator economy, where this is new for a lot of brands. A lot of brands are still dipping their toes into it and still understanding the effectiveness. The landscape, signal loss, fidelity loss, regulation. How have those conversations evolved, and how are you walking brands through continuing to measure effectiveness?
It's interesting because, as you mentioned, there's a lot more regulations, there's a lot more scrutiny, there's a more closed off ecosystem. And when we speak to brands, they still want more than what they wanted before. Now they want, be able to slice and dice every element of their media mix, understanding each unique and incremental value of each element of their campaign, down to the smallest elements of their placement and their creative, or by their segment, or by different constituents of their media mix for every KPI that they have, especially if they have a holistic marketing strategy that includes both awareness but also more lower funnel metrics. They want all of that. And while they're cognizant of the challenges in the industry, they leave that to us to figure that out. I think that's what we try to work. We try to work very closely with different platforms and partners to be able to set up, privacy conscious or privacy centric and rigorous methodologies to be able to capture that. Obviously, there is power in data science and being able to project some of the data points that you don't have because of these regulations. But it's a challenging world, but I'm excited about it because it gives me job stability just because it gets harder every day.
I mean, I love the job stability part of it. That is very important. George, like TikTok specifically, how have you found it?
I feel very privileged and I feel very rewarded that the team has. I have one of the best teams in the industry right now, where the work that they've been doing globally of kind of evolving this journey across verticals, across business objectives, it still comes down to. And one of the fascinating things is, as clients ask us to understand effectiveness, the next question is on how do we improve it, how do we do better. It comes back down to creative, because again, TikTok has a lot of opportunity. It has a very unique style, but there's a lot of things that brands have now been able to master that style. As we expand and work into more business objectives, whether it's like sales lift, tune in, or offline sales, or mobile app events, it's just seeing how, despite the differences in many of the verticals, as clients are growing, the consistency on, I want to understand my media levers. I want to understand my creative recipes. I want to understand how do I look at TikTok in the mix. I want to understand how do I leverage all this new, for example, some new things that we're working on is understanding TikTok in the mix, and especially with our partnership with Nielsen on understanding audience measurement, understanding incremental reach, understanding attention, but also for commerce-leaning clients, understanding the role of the path to purchase and understanding the role of shops as part of like an omni-channel retail strategy. These are all things that we're thinking about, but also at the heart of it is creative effectiveness, solid measurement frameworks, and again, really strong planning to ensure that measurement is at the core of how you build your campaigns.
And finally, Chris, like as the world of podcasts has been exploding, especially within the past year, one of the things I've noticed is I learn about podcasts through clips they post on TikTok and platforms. How are you seeing those conversations evolve as the library of different podcasts continues to grow and brands are seeking out to do partnerships?
Yeah, I mean, look, any podcaster, I always say like audio is the center of your universe, and use every other business stream basically, whether it be social media, YouTube, TikTok, or merchandising, live events, whatever it is, to engage with your audience. And one of those other things, even though audio is at your core, may become the biggest part of your business down the line. Who knows? But for me, it's like, how do you one, create the most engaged community and meet your audience where they're at, and then also bring the brand to the audience where they're at. And so, can you sponsor, a 60-second video clip that's really just promoting your podcast because it's a clip of your podcast, and maybe your goal is to move from a video platform to the audio of your podcast, but have like the presented by, Subway or whatever, right, on there. There's opportunities for monetization all across the board. It doesn't matter what your core focus is as a creator, whether it's a newsletter, audio, video, it's all the same. You need to be everywhere where the audience is. And that's kind of the beauty of the creator economy right now, is that you can be everywhere. There's no gatekeepers in a lot of these scenarios. And so if you're able to engage with audiences, engage with them on multiple platforms.
Totally. Well, thank you guys so much for the time. Thank you for the insights. And thank you all for your attention and for joining the best panel you guys have ever seen. Thank you so much.